By the end of this video, you'll see why highly sensitive people often carry guilt, shame, or self-doubt after conflict, and how things can start to feel different when you understand the deeper pattern underneath it. In this video, you'll discover why highly sensitive people can carry guilt or self-doubt long after conflict is over. What your mind starts doing when emotional tension feels like proof that you've done something wrong, and how things can start to feel different when you understand the deeper pattern underneath those reactions. Have you ever had a conflict with someone, and even after the conversation ends, your body still feels tense hours later? You replay what you said, you wonder if your tone might have been wrong, or you think about how they looked at you, and you imagine what they might be feeling now. And even if part of you knows the conflict wasn't that serious, another part of you feels like something painful has happened internally, like connection itself has become unstable. For many highly sensitive people, conflict doesn't just feel uncomfortable, it feels deeply destabilizing. And sometimes the conflict itself isn't even that big. Maybe someone sounds irritated with you. Just that is enough. Maybe your partner becomes frustrated. Maybe someone gives you critical feedback at work. Or maybe there's tension in someone's tone and you pick up on it. Or just sometimes the conversation suddenly feels emotionally different. And then almost immediately, your nervous system reacts. Your body tightens. Your mind becomes alert. Part of you starts scanning the interaction, trying to understand what happened. What did I do? Did I say something wrong? Was my tone off? Did I upset them? Should I have handled that differently? And even after the conversation ends, the internal processing keeps going. And so this is this blurry ground between being highly sensitive and getting stressed on top of sensitivity. It's natural for us to scan interactions and try to understand what happened, but it's not natural. It's not our natural sensitivity that makes us take on the full responsibility for it. When I think it's my fault, then I've actually taken on more responsibility than is actually mine. So what happens is you end up replaying the interaction later in your mind, and you start to rethink your wording, or you imagine different ways the conversation could have gone, or you think about how the other person may be feeling, and you wonder if they're still upset. And you try to mentally repair the tension long after the interaction is over. And one of the painful parts for many highly sensitive people is that the other person may already be over it, while internally your nervous system is still carrying it. They've moved on, but your system hasn't. And this can become exhausting over time. Now again, naturally, we will hold on to and work through the experience of conflict longer than other people. This is just natural. We will process this more slowly, more methodically, more thoroughly, and this is a good thing. But we can get stuck in that processing, and that's what I'm wanting to address in this episode. We can get stuck there trying to figure it out, and the problem is we're often looking in the wrong place, where we're blaming ourselves and thinking that it's our fault and getting stuck there instead of understanding what's actually going on. Because eventually conflict stops feeling like two people having a difficult moment and starts feeling like something is wrong with me. And that's the deeper pain underneath a lot of conflict sensitivity. Not just the tension itself. Yes, we are sensitive to tension. Yes, we prefer not to have tension. And yes, we're wired to find ways to reduce tension and keep the peace. That is our job. That is our role to a certain degree. but we can't control everything. And when we start thinking that it's completely up to us and that we have failed when conflict arises, then that's when we can start blaming ourselves. And that's when the pain amplifies tremendously. And this is where the pattern becomes important to understand. Highly sensitive people are often deeply attuned to emotional shifts. We notice tone changes, facial expressions, energy shifts, just that slight movement of body language that communicates so much. We can tell when there's emotional distance. We can tell when there's disappointment. Sometimes almost immediately. It's just a sense. And your nervous system picks up on a huge amount of emotional information very quickly. And because of that, the mind can start organizing around emotional harmony, trying to preserve it or protect it or repair it. And while this is naturally what we're built to do, and is not a bad thing, because often we can protect harmony and repair damages and find ways to make it work for everyone. This is our gift. But if we hold on to that role too tightly, then when we're unable to do it, then we can end up getting very stressed because we're not able to bring harmony there. And so this is what can get us caught and can get us into a looping kind of situation. And slowly, without realizing it, emotional tension can start feeling like it's all your responsibility. The mind starts treating emotional harmony like something you solely are supposed to maintain. Yes, we can often do things, and that's wonderful, but it's not fully our responsibility. So when conflict appears, your system doesn't only register disagreement, it can also register danger or disconnection or instability or possible rejection. And the mind quickly moves towards blaming itself. What does this mean about me? That's why even relatively small conflicts can sometimes create guilt and shame and self-doubt and emotional reactiveness, far beyond the actual situation itself. Because it's what we make it mean about ourselves that really triggers the stress reaction. And many highly sensitive people learned this pattern very early. Maybe emotional tension didn't feel safe growing up, or harmony was highly valued. I know in my family, I never heard my parents argue. I never heard it, never heard them fight. And so I just assumed that harmony was the norm. I didn't realize that this was their way of trying to maintain this kind of feeling of harmony, even though my parents ended up divorcing in the end. So maybe when you were younger, you became emotionally responsible for the atmosphere around you. Maybe you thought it was your role. And maybe you had a gift to help maintain harmony, but then you took on that responsibility beyond what was actually yours to take on. Maybe you learned to carefully monitor reactions so things wouldn't escalate. Or maybe sensitivity itself was misunderstood. Maybe you were told, you're too sensitive, or you take things too personally, or you're overreacting. So over time, conflict stopped feeling emotionally neutral. It wasn't just something that happens sometimes. It started feeling personal, like this is something that I could have stopped, or that I did wrong, or some kind of personal failure on my side. The difficult part is what this can slowly do to your life. Because when conflict feels emotionally dangerous, you begin organizing yourself around avoiding it. You start to soften your honesty. You start to hold back your needs. You start to over-explain yourself. You start to monitor your tone. And you become hyper-aware of how other people might react. And eventually, you may start abandoning parts of yourself preemptively just to keep emotional tension from happening in the first place. This creates enormous exhaustion internally because your nervous system is constantly trying to prevent rupture, to preserve connection, to manage emotional reactions, to keep everyone okay. And over time, you may stop trusting your own experience completely. You may start assuming that because you feel guilty, you must have done something wrong. But guilt and wrongdoing are not always the same thing. That distinction is incredibly important because the feeling itself is real, but the interpretation may not always be accurate. And one of the beliefs that often keeps this whole pattern going is if someone is upset with me, it means that I've done something wrong. Or if conflict exists, it means that I've failed somehow. Or if I stay connected to myself, I might lose connection with them. These kinds of beliefs often operate quietly under the surface, but they shape how conflict gets experienced internally, especially for highly sensitive people whose nervous systems are already processing emotional information deeply. But something begins to change when you start separating emotional discomfort from moral failure. This is a huge shift. Other people are allowed to feel disappointed. Other people are allowed to feel frustrated. They're allowed to feel emotional. They're allowed to disagree with you without that automatically meaning that you've done something wrong. This is what I mean by separating the emotional discomfort. Yeah, having someone disagree with me is not perfectly comfortable, but it's way more comfortable than thinking that I did something wrong, like a moral failure, that I screwed up. And so that can be very hard for highly sensitive people to fully absorb emotionally because the nervous system still feels the intention intensely. We're not going to stop feeling the tension intensely. That's what we're built to do. We amplify things internally, and that allows us to be aware of things that others aren't aware of. But that intensity does not automatically equal danger, and it does not automatically equal guilt. It's just something that we need to be aware of. Another important shift is beginning to include yourself in the interaction again. Not just their feelings, their reactions, their disappointment, but your own internal reality too. Like, what were your actual intentions? Oftentimes they were not bad. And probably 99.9% of the time they were not. Or including looking at your own limits. Like, I've reached the end of my rope, and it's not that I want conflict, but this is something I have to stand up for. Or your truth, or your experience. When you start looking towards yourself in this way, then the feeling of guilt becomes less because you start to see where you were coming from instead of using only them as the external reference for the validity of your experience. Because empathy is not the same thing as emotional responsibility. You can care deeply about someone without making yourself fully responsible for their emotional state. And this doesn't mean that conflict suddenly becomes easy or that criticism stops affecting you completely. Highly sensitive people will probably always feel emotional tension more deeply than others. But understanding what's actually happening underneath the reaction can begin changing the relationship you have with conflict itself. Because this isn't weakness. It isn't proof that you're bad at relationships. It's often a deeply attuned nervous system picking up on subtleties, combined with learned patterns around responsibility, connection, and emotional safety. So this is what I say, the natural sensitivity, we all have a natural sensitivity, And then we have learned patterns and stress coping mechanisms laid on top of that cause us to experience the stress that we experience. Otherwise, we would just notice the tension. We would feel it strongly, but it wouldn't go into the spiral that often happens when stress patterns are involved. So if you're tired of carrying conflict around for hours or days and feeling like even small moments of tension become emotionally overwhelming internally, and you don't want to keep replaying conversations and doubting yourself and organizing your nervous system around other people's reactions, but what you really want is more internal steadiness, more self-trust, and the ability to stay connected to yourself even when tension exists, then this is exactly the kind of inner work we can explore together in one-on-one sessions. We can look at emotional responsibility, conflict sensitivity, nervous system patterns, underlying beliefs, and the way your mind interprets emotional tension internally. Just go to the video description and click on the first link you find, or go to trueinnerfreedom.com/working-together.